Record button. All right, cool. So we're back after a bit of a hiatus. Kind of, I guess, under the natural order kind of channels where I'll upload this to, but we're really just kind of touching base, just chatting it up, kind of developing some of the threads we've been spinning on various platforms, some good topics and stuff like that. Um, I'm glad to have you over on the Facebook side because that's where I am, as you probably can tell, that's where I'm the most active. So it's interesting. It's different than Twitter. It's different than some of the other platforms.
I have grown tired of Twitter. I It's been captured by the disenfranchised right,
Yeah,
and it's like it's not the fun kinds. It's like the under 30s angry single man working in the trades, and he's just pissed off at everything.
yeah.
And it's just hundreds of thousands of them, and then there's porn bots, and I'm just like, all right, I'm done.
That's a it's a good that's a great topic. That's actually something that's been developing with me recently. Um, I'm always kind of going like kind of shifting here and there, but yeah, definitely like we've talked about before just some of the shortcomings with like the right. So like when we talk about the right, you've got obviously like the boomers and the Christian, but whenever you talk about the neo right, the alt right, the dissident right, that's kind of the circles that we have found ourselves kind of adjacent to. But like we've kind of found, I think we both, like a lot of people, have seen some of the shortcomings and some of the issues, like the purity spiraling, like the overly misogynistic, sometimes overly racial, things like that. And so yeah, I agree. Twitter is kind of, I'm in those circles on Twitter, and I don't have much else coming through my feed. So
Yeah, well, it doesn't like I said, everything else is drowned out because the way they have the algorithm set. Like I'm having that problem with YouTube right now, where I'm like having to just. I think in the past week, I've literally muted like over 100 accounts that are like being suggested to me over and over again. I'm like, I don't want this, and then it just keeps showing me more, and I'm like, just because I hold a single belief that the far right holds doesn't mean I want to see the entire far right. And YouTube's like, no, you are either one all in or
man,
you're all out. It's like, but can I not just have like variations in belief? Like, is that complicated?
right. Yeah, it's so interesting to think about how the algorithms kind of try to do that to us. It tries to put us in boxes. It tries to
Well,
generalize.
the algorithms while we're here in the first place. That's why the right is so bad. That's
Mhm,
what created the left that we're enduring right now.
mhm.
So wokeism is just 1968 civil rights era acting out in culture because
Mm,
culture is downstream from law.
mm.
And um that's what wokeism is. The reason it's so bad is because algorithms put all of them in an echo chamber and they just sat there for 10 years.
Hmm.
Well, now we're going through this with the right. So now I get to look forward until like 2032, what we're going through with the wokeism. Well, we're going to see that explode and take over the culture in the next 10 years, and that's
Yeah.
going to be super fun.
Oh my goodness.
Because they're worse because they're actually organized. And sorry, they're not. They're not organized yet. They're efficient. The left is really really good at talking, and they're really bad at doing.
Hmm.
Every time they try to push any authoritarianism, it just slips through their fingers like it's sand. The right is very good at holding on to things until they choke up to death.
So that's funny you say that because I'd almost think of the opposite. Like you said, the left is good at talking but bad at doing, and the right is good at doing but bad at talking. I'd almost see it as the other way around because like when I think about leftists, like well, first of all, when I think about
Well, hold
talking,
on. So with power, you are correct. With culture, that's not true. The
yeah.
left can't hold on to a culture because there's too many conflicting groups.
Hmm.
The right just needs a leader. With the left, they have their own. There's like three major groups. There's the trades unionists, which is like the Marxists. Um, there's like business. What was it? I think Zihan put this. Did you see Zihan's video when he was going over why the left cannot hold, can't get along? He had three main groups, and I wish I remember them. I remember the unionists, and then he listed two others, and
Yeah.
that's why they can't ever agree on anything. Whereas the right, as of right now, it's just anti-abortion and then Christian fundamentalism, and then pro-Israel, and that's about it.
Well, see, that's another thing that I think is inverted because in my perception, the left is pretty unified under this like cloud of basically the victim, the minority, the gender thing. Like that's all pretty like narrative focused, like cohesive. Whereas the right, especially the dissident right, is like all fighting each other and can't unify. Um, so it could be topsy turvy. Hmm.
No, I'm referring to the establishment elite. My bad. So the
Yeah. So
left as
again,
a
yeah,
whole.
yeah, that's really interesting. I keep making that assumption. Like when we're talking about these like ideological camps, I kind of assume more of like the culture, the grassroots, like the people at the ground floor. But you're thinking more
So
about the elite
generally,
camps.
when I'm talking, I'm usually referring. Do you know elite theory?
I think you mentioned it before, but remind me.
Yeah. So elite control the culture, and they control it through. I don't. I just said this, but like So remember that culture is downstream from law, right? The civil rights era is coming, and where the culture is reacting to that. It's
Mm-hmm.
forming around that. You ever seen like the ATF memes?
So yeah, some of them. Yeah.
Yeah, so there is that's a culture, like the anti-ATF is a culture that's forming
Okay.
because of law that the right is reacting to. A
Hmm.
population reacts to law, those reactions manufacture narratives which manufacture into culture.
Right.
Cultural myths, like
Um, so the whole like culture is downstream from law thing is very interesting. Like, that's something I've gone into several times with several people. My conclusion, because first of all, my intuition is to first of all argue the opposite, that in a lot of ways the law is downstream from culture, or like for example, like and it kind of and the conclusion is that they go hand in hand. Basically, like laws can influence how culture reacts. The way the culture reacts can bubble up to law. There's an interaction basically, and it's hard to measure which one is the greater influence. You know, in my mind.
I mean, I think that's a fair argument that they can cause one another.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. They can.
Regardless, the culture does not bubble up without the wall, because that's what they're running into.
Mm-hmm.
There's a wall that's stopping them either from wanting to act or think a certain way, and they
Okay.
want that wall removed,
Hmm.
right? So that's a culture that manufactures that would otherwise not exist.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I think it's more accurate to say that culture is downstream from law.
Right. And once I think most would admit that of course it's not that one sided, that there is some opportunity for culture to influence law, and the way that manifests in a more tangible way. Like for example, I know when I interacted with the natural law guys, and we were talking about strategy and how could we make things better. What was the best avenue to channel our efforts? And of course, a lot of them believe very much the culture is downstream from law. Everything is downstream from law, and so they're like, let's do law. But I'm like,
Well, no, you can't start with that because you have to maintain monopoly on power, and they don't have that.
right. And so that's why early on their movement was about like the power and the arms and like the like that kind of like very that
No, if
piece
you're a
first.
dissident, you have to start with culture. So you have to create a culture that then creates law.
Yeah.
Soros, I think, is probably who's best at doing this. He manufactures a culture and then he predicts what the reaction will be, and the reaction is his goal.
Yeah, I like that you. Well, first of all, I always like how you are thinking about like elite theory and breaking it down. Because I like I've said, I get sucked into those like generalizations and stuff. You actually posted something today, I believe. I was gonna go look it up. That was breaking down those like elite camps, like the WEF, like the neocons, and then like the Soros. And so I was thinking about that. Let's see if I can go find it. You post a lot of good stuff. Is this it right here? There we go. So you said like the neo. I may have tried to pull it up on the stream, but you said the neocons, techno globalists, the WF, and the third worldists, the Soros. So in a lot of ways, in my mind, I would definitely group the WF and the Soros together. So it's interesting to think about how they're
Soros is a counter elite to the WEF because he is not pro technology, he is pro anti America.
his pro idea like that.
Well, no, remember, he grew up in Nazi Germany. And
Mhm.
so, from his perspective, we are the bad guys. Now, he has a very odd. He's a complicated person, and his son is even more complicated because I've watched both of them. And I would say, just because I like game theoretics, I like Machiavelli, Robert Greene's 40 Laws of Power. I like because it's all the way the world works.
Right.
Um, and so attacking it's not very useful.
Just understand it.
Um,
Yeah.
but I like to understand it, and
Hmm.
so when I look and I try to understand, I'm like, okay, what do you want? Like, why are you spending your time and money trying to have like what's your goal here? Um, and the only conclusion that I can come to is for whatever happens in his childhood and whatever he witnessed, Western civilization is the problem for
Hmm.
whatever reason.
Interesting.
And he sees it as a problem. And so his logic is I'm just going to throw infinite amounts of brown people at every single nation until I go away. And then I'm going to be happy. And I'm like, okay, I don't know how, like he's made tons of money off of us.
God.
For whatever reason, this is what he wants. And I don't
See,
like I said, he
that's
might just be an angry person. And I
right.
look at his face and I'm like, you look like an angry person. And I've read his books.
So
I
he,
mean,
so
he doesn't
okay.
his won't make sense to
W-
me, but I understand where he's coming from. He
But
just wants to tear it all down.
he
Like
lives
kind of
in
like
America though. Like that's the biggest thing. Like if he hates it so bad, why does he live here?
he's old. But like honestly, he's a very confusing person, and
Right.
so I try to rationalize in my head, and I'm like, number one, he's an extremely good strategist. He has made billions of dollars betting against reactions to the market. So like he makes a bet, right? Knowing that bet will fail. And then there's a reaction, and then there's another thing that happens in 10 years, and then he makes billions of dollars. And he does that like multiple times.
Right. He's
So
just
he's
yeah.
thinking like I'm not saying that he's like this godly person. He can like think, 7 steps ahead. No one can do that. But he's extremely good at predicting. And so when I watch him and I'm like, his when I watch what he's doing, the only conclusion that I can come to is he's trying to force manufacture what is essentially Nazism
Hmm.
as a reaction to the culture he's creating.
Wow. Damn.
Because when I look at his investment methods, usually there's 3 steps. It's a action, reaction, additional action to that reaction, and
Right.
then that's the end goal. How he's typically made his billions. That's how he's gotten into philanthropy because he's
Yeah.
done it. He's done it multiple times, and so usually it's in 3 steps. So, and like I said, I could be wrong. Um, I don't, I don't, I don't fully understand it. So this is just me trying to rationalize and make sense
Sure.
the actions of a very powerful person.
Yeah.
So he's throwing money at something. He's creating a problem, and then that problem is going to create another problem, and then the end goal is the reaction to that problem,
Hmm. Yeah, no, I
which
get,
is
I
far-right
get
as
what
it
you're
gets.
saying. Like that's just like a good investing 101. Like just being able to kind of predict things and yeah, invest and make money off of it. But the other big part of it too is that obviously like at this point he has like a lot of extremely wealthy people. They have a hand in controlling how these investments play out and basically backing up their investments. Like if they can pull strings that like can create wars, just like politicians. Even politicians like have insider information. They go buy stocks, insider trading. They make money. And he's just like that, but on a global, billion-dollar scale. Um, it's interesting to me because I think again, like when I'm looking, I've got the chart pulled up for the video, and I've got it pulled up here on the side, just this like neocon techno globalist Soros thing because it's very interesting. And one of the things I'm thinking about, because again, in my mind, a lot of these things are kind of just grouped together. Like, I'm sure I oversimplify, overgeneralize at times, but there's definitely just like whenever I think of the big bad, what is the giant bad going on, all the different parties involved, there's definitely a lot of crossover. But yeah, there probably are different agendas and different people with their own kind of thing. And I'm sure Soros, when I think about him, from limited information I know, I just know he's very wealthy. He has a
If
ton of
you read
money.
his books, he's
Uh,
actually you'll disagree with him, but it's good to get in the head of how he thinks.
right. I agree. Speaking of, as a little bit of a side, but very relevant to this discussion, do you know of is it Yuval Harari or whatever? No, Yuval Noah Harari.
Actually, I like him. He's just
Yeah,
very bad at talking.
yeah, yeah. I mean, he's English is not his first language, and I do like a lot of his ideas. Like when I very first saw him, a lot of his like it just seemed like he was like the evil goblin. Like
He's a zeitgeist because what happens in his videos, he says the way the world is,
right.
not the way it should be. And he's very bad at communicating that this is what I want. So all he does is he autistically recites in detail how the world actually is. It's like, yes, lions will gang rape female lions.
Hmm.
That's nature. It's brutal. but you don't talk about humans doing that as if you were that person. He's like really, really bad about that, but
Yeah.
he doesn't see it because he's an Aspie.
That's funny you say that because like my perception, again, limited perception of him is that he is very well. He definitely does have a good basis in reality, including like evolution and anthropology, but he does seem to be like a pretty well informed idealist and futurist about an optimistic one at that about what we can do. Of course, a lot of it ties into like the new world order or Great Reset kind of stuff, but I think he's moving in the right direction. Like, just at a basic level, the fact that he's like trying to raise awareness about evolution, I'm good with that. Like, that's cool because honestly, at the end of the day, if people understand evolution, they're probably going to become more aligned with nature and right wing
The
ideology.
right actually agrees with him more than they realize because if you read Sapiens,
Yeah.
literally in the first part, he talks about the fact that genetics are everything.
Right. Yep.
And then he goes to say that new science suggests that this is not the case. And it's dangerous for us as Westerners to dare acknowledge the racial differences
Mm-hmm.
are actually more powerful because that will destroy democracy. Essentially, is what he says. He acknowledges that it's real, but
Right.
we have to ignore it for now.
He says
And I'm
th-
like,
that's cool.
so
Like I'm actually good with that. Like as long as at some level you can admit that like this is the truth, but just people are not ready for it. Like I understand that that is a reality we live in. That this is something that like super autistic people struggle with. Like they just want raw truth 100% of the time, but like they can't wrap their head around the functional layers that society is ready for at a given time or a given IQ level. So yeah.
I don't. That's it. We're not there yet, but that is um, one of the concepts that I came up with Wade. Transitional religions,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've heard
a
you say that word.
transition period,
Yeah.
a transition period to get us from now until the next point in our psychological development
Mm-hmm.
as a species.
Yeah.
Um, and I thought that orthodoxy was a good model to base that off of because it's lasted for so long, but it's ritualistic. Anyway, we're still on elites, so you can
Well,
continue
I was
after
gonna
this
say, I
thought.
mean, because I was kind of, that's another good topic that we've had written down. That's a potentially a good transition, and that does relate to like the natural order too. So I'll be okay to transition to that. Let's see, let's think. Where are we at? We're at what time did we even start? We started at like 7:15 or so, so we're only
So
15
the
minutes
three
in.
topics I had written down for you: the purpose of Christianity,
Yeah,
which is that
just
that line
religion.
of thought;
Yeah,
elite perpetuation of beautiful lies,
yeah,
which is where we're at now;
yeah.
and then human nature's default of entropy and how to code it out.
Right. Okay.
So we're currently on topic 2, and we can go to topic 1 and 3 either now, if you or at another time.
So yeah, let's stay on elites for at least another like 15 minutes or so, and if it keeps going, that's fine. And then we'll probably queue up. Maybe we'll queue up religion next, and then we'll go from there. And if it's a whole other video, it's a whole other video. Um,
That
so
works.
okay, so back to elites. So back to this chart. Still trying to break it down. So we talked about Soros a little bit. He's a good investor. He's probably got his hands in some of these like this idea of insider trading, like ensuring that your investments work out. Like if you're able to instigate
We
wars and
need to
sell guns.
acknowledge. I'm gonna let you continue, but we need to acknowledge that there is a possibility that they are all on the same side, and this is a manufactured dissidence that's fake
Mhm.
for
You
the
mean like
purposes of sedation.
oh yes, I'm definitely aware of that like controlled opposition, like the
Yeah.
appearance of divide and conquer, like fake enemy. Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely a good thing to keep in mind.
So I think the more rational and realistic, uh, just because humans are tribal, I think that it's more realistic that they would actually be against each other.
Hmm.
But we also need to acknowledge that this could very well be controlled opposition, but we're going to move forward as if it's not.
Right. Okay. Good point. So let's see here. So, like I said, we agree that he's powerful, he's wealthy. So really, it just comes down to what has he really got his hands in as far as what he's influencing and what's kind of the goal behind it. And so this chart is kind of saying, uh,
You're not sharing it, by the way, just letting you know.
oh, sorry, it's not on Discord. It's just like in the OBS feed. So if you want to pull it up yourself, or I can send it to you, I can probably copy and paste it into
I
the
have it.
chat.
You're good.
Okay, you got it. Okay, there we go. So yeah, I've got it pulled up there. Let me get this back up. Okay, so equalize the relative standings of the West and the Third World. So this is just basically like global communism, right? Is kind of what this is talking about. And yeah, similarly, transfer wealth from the West to the Third World, so global communism. Yeah, that's kind of what I'm seeing across the board. Like you're basically bringing the immigrants here or taking our money and putting it everywhere else. Yeah, dissolve. So, and this is again, it sounds a lot like the middle column. You're basically talking about globalism and communism. And if you look on the in the middle column in the WEF techno globalist, you're seeing globalism, eliminate distinctions, which is like Marxism, communism. Um, More power and control, of course, like that's a common goal. Yeah, just more globalism.
Yeah, the elite today are all liberal,
Mhm,
and they're all communal.
mhm.
And it's also important to understand that just based off of genetics, that because a lot of them are Jewish, they're going to be predisposed to think more communist like,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
because they do have that trait female, you know, edge nudging them
cognition.
forward.
Yeah, that's their strategy. Yeah. So my perception has been that because of that, because you have this in group of people that are ethnically, religiously tied in, have been genetically tied in, have been doing this for a long time, have gotten really good at it. Like to me, that still makes a lot of sense that that is the in group, and that there is a lot of this, like there's a lot of communism, parasitism, feminism.
Yeah, Christopher Lasch, in his book Revolt of the Elites, he does a very good job of detailing what created the modern elites.
Right.
And I think that the WEF types are where it started, and the two dissidents, where I guess the dissidents to that would be Soros, and then the neocons are the old world elites, right? Because when you
Um.
go, like, I understand it's messy because we're trying to force them into categories when there's a lot of overlap, but just for the sake of communication, the putting them in categories is easier when we're
Mhm.
discussing them, because they do have specific things that they counter. So it's not what they agree on; it's what they disagree on. That's where these categories come from. This is not mine, by the way. This comes from Academic Agent.
Yeah,
This is
I
his.
like him. He's made some good stuff. Yeah, I
Yeah.
like his stuff. Um, and that's kind of what I'm thinking too. Like, in a lot of ways, you can basically group this together as a similar kind of like entity. But like I said, it does probably break down. But in a lot of ways, I still would probably argue for the like. Let's like we'll go ahead and talk about the neocons. To me, that just looks like another wing of the same monster base. So like that's just the military wing of it. That's the
The
military.
octopus.
Yeah, and which is another academic agent thing that he's made that I really liked. Yeah, so that's a really I should probably pull it up. I don't know if I can find it very quickly, but
I believe
um,
I shared that as well.
yeah, that one's a banger. Just talking about like you've got all these different wings. You got like the Marshall wing. You've got the control the military, control the narrative, control the finance.
The chest. Yeah, all the
Yeah,
categories.
and I don't know how much I don't know how much I conveyed this or how much you've seen of this, but like my proposition for like how we need to be thinking going forward is like we basically need to be constructing an octopus of our own. We need to be attacking on all fronts. We need to be understanding and influencing the cultural dynamic. We need to be looking for financial solutions and ways to influence that. And then same with the marshal and the law, right? And so I think
I
that's a really
brought
good
this
model.
up. I think I brought this up in the Telegram multiple times and
Hmm.
maybe a couple times on Twitter back in 2022.
Yeah.
I continued to remind them, without elite or an elite supporting you, you are not getting anywhere
Mm,
in this modern culture, because all that has to happen is the media, some analyst somewhere in some think tank makes a phone call, and then magically all of your videos disappear
yeah.
because you don't have any elite backing.
Hmm.
Like, this is not how you start a culture
Well,
or a revolution.
I'm
Because think
th-
about the American Revolution, the Civil War, the French Revolution. All of them had some form of elite, and they had them. I brought this up to you actually in the Discord chat like a week ago.
right.
Um, you need to have backers.
Yeah.
And then there's also like the beautiful lie that our nation perpetuates is the fact that we have rights,
Hmm.
which is the only reason that the modern elites, like the neocons, can even stay in power. It's because
Hmm.
people actually believe that they have rights.
One thing, I guess one common theme here is I'm saying like with rights, for example, it's just like I guess the fact that no one's really taking them
It's
away at the moment. Like you appear to be free until it's really constrained. Like when shit hits the fan, yeah, like you probably will realize how little we actually have.
Well, yeah, it's sedation. So, like, when you look at all policy from the founding fathers, they did not give us rights, even though it's the Bill of Rights. It's everything that is written is a negative on the government. So it's like they shall not pass, Congress
Negativa.
shall not pass
Yeah.
any law XYZ.
Right.
That's a negative on the government. You don't have any rights. Just because I can go to the store, the gun store, and buy a machine gun with a tax stamp doesn't mean that I'm free.
Right.
Because I can still get no knock rated tonight.
Yeah.
Like it's not like I
Yeah.
don't like this. It's just sedation as far as I'm
Yeah,
concerned.
I do agree. I mean, we've seen plenty of evidence that they're willing to basically override every supposed right that we have. I mean, yeah, at the end of the day, like it, whatever's on a piece of paper is fine, but what really matters is what people can get away with, and or what what you're going to prevent, either physically prevent or you're going to create tangible repercussions for if they do something. Right? Like
Yeah,
that's the
their
bottom line.
greatest invention was voting, though, because if you think about the past 80, 100, 150 years, name an election that resulted in the average person getting anything they asked for. It
Right.
never happens.
Well,
The only example you have is FDR, and he would just got elected by about because the women could vote.
yeah.
We had the same kind of president for 100 years. Women got allowed to vote, and then magically populists came out of nowhere. Like who would have thunk it? But anyway, like the voting doesn't accomplish anything for the average person.
Mhm.
It's the people with money. Because if I vote someone in power, they tell me, "Oh, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z," and then all of a sudden they do a bunch of things that people with money want, and it's like, "Oh, well, that's kind of weird." So all I need to do is give them $5 million, and I magically get a bill passed that affects me. That's useful, but like the average person, they don't seem to understand that because they just keep doing it again and again and again, and they're not learning.
Right.
But maybe that's a good. The elite love that, so that's a very efficient form of sedation.
So I'm trying to string some things together here and rewind a little bit. So you said that basically in order for a movement to happen, it basically needs to be backed by an elite, and history kind of supports this, and everything we're seeing kind of supports this. I guess one thing I'm thinking is like obviously like when it comes to like elites versus average people, there's a spectrum. It's not just like there's not like a hard cutoff, and you have billionaires and like Joe Schmo's blue collar. Like
Well,
there's
yeah, it's difficult because we're Westerners, and Westerners are individualistic.
right like
So it complicates things. It's not
yeah.
as easy to categorize as it is historically.
Right. I guess one of the points I'm trying to develop is that I guess A is just like the thought that you don't have to have like an elite. You don't have to have like someone like at the top. You can have like for example, you could either have one billionaire supporting you, or you could have 10,000, or 100,000 people willing to chip in a little bit, and you're basically in a similar place as far as your power and influence. So there are
Numbers
such a thing
make
as crowdsourcing.
numbers complicate things.
I agree. I do agree, but what other options do we have? Like do we? And this is the Kurt and their whole thing is like we just gotta magically find some elite who's like just gonna be like, yeah, this is no elites by their very nature are invested in the system. Like they have every incentive not to challenge the system. So the only way you're going to find significant challenge is going to be on the outskirts and in the
That's not
crowd-funded.
necessarily true because the founding fathers were likely only 12 in number, and they pulled together a bunch of elites in the making,
Hmm,
lawyers,
that's
judges,
true.
business industry people. I mean, the Civil War was like the North. That was just the northern soldiers. They were all ran by like not their generals. They were ran by industry moguls.
Hmm,
It wasn't Rockefeller and them weren't in power at the time, but it was the predecessors to the robber barons. It was the railroad industrialists. They were just businessmen, and they were not okay, and so they bought off, they captured the elite, and they said this slavocracy in the South,
hmm,
providing free labor and next to nothing cost in goods production, which is why they were obnoxiously wealthy in the South.
hmm.
Um, because labor was free. That's why China is able to grow at the rate they do, is because they have slaves. The slaves are extremely profitable,
Yep.
but they're detrimental to your society.
Yep.
They didn't like that. That was interrupting their industry, and
Hmm.
so they waged war. That's that I forget who initiated it first. I believe the North started it by blowing up like a granary or something.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, like that's the same thing. So right now we're watching in the making the right fail again to compile an elite, counter elite, You have a bunch of disenfranchised right. What if Altus brings this up literally every time he makes a video? Rudyard. Um, and the left is currently eating itself.
Hmm.
So this is actually a very good time for a counter elite that is not quite in power yet to start making phone calls.
Yeah.
Hey, I have a really good movement. Would you mind watching this video? I'll pay you, or your analyst or whoever. Tell them to watch this video and give you a brief.
Hmm.
Like, can you help me fund me? I will give you a position. I'll give you a seat. I'll give you a vote.
Yeah.
Whatever. Like you're essentially like Kurt is not selling himself. He's presenting it and saying, "Join me. I want to lead." No, you're not going to lead. You created a product. Because in the Western world, we are so transactional to a fault that everything we do is products.
Hmm.
Like there's what's that running meme? All modern men do today is consume content and purchase products. That's all we do.
Consume, eat hot chip, and consume. Yeah. Um. So this is a good. This is making what I'm thinking, and this is perfectly on time and a good transition into the religious. We're talking about how can we build a counter elite. We have a pretty good idea of what the existing like establishment elite is like. So we kind of think about what would be the how could we form a counter elite. So when I think about the counter elite, or the best opportunity. Obviously, the biggest camps right now, you've got like basically the Christian boomer, Trumper, right?
Boomer cons.
Pretty much NormieCon, BoomerCon, like that kind of market. And then on the left, which is like you said, they're kind of eating themselves right now. Like for the last uh, 10 years or so, the kind of like the left, like the Antifas, like the all the way down at the bottom,
Victim industrial
huh?
complex.
What do you say?
The victim industrial complex is what I call it.
I like that. That's pretty. That's actually pretty good. Or just the Marxists, or the cultural Marxists, or communists, or whatever, the feminine, cog fem, whatever you want to call it. So
The
they,
victim industrial complex, and then the military industrial complex. That's the left and the right.
that's pretty good. Yeah, that's honestly not bad at all. But for the last 10 years, that the victim industrial complex, the left as we know it, has kind of been aligned or kind of has been co-opted by like the elites. But what's really interesting is with the whole Israel Palestine conflict, it's potentially another opportunity for things to turn on their head.
Yeah,
So
they didn't count on cultural clashes because they thought that um, being a victim was enough to unite them, and then they're slowly realizing that blacks hate Hispanics, uh, Arabs hate blacks, that there's a class issue among all of them, that the elites now have to pick sides and they're cannibalizing each other. It's
right.
becoming a clusterfuck, and they were not counting on that.
Yeah, I see two main things happening. One thread that was already developing is that despite like when you're on the internet, you get like the extremes of both sides, and you think these people are crazy. But whenever you actually talk to people who are like kind of left leaning, and they're starting to say like, actually, yeah, they're kind of they're kind of like the whole cancel culture thing, like that's starting to kind of like no one, a lot of them were afraid to stand out because the extremists on the left were basically would not allow anybody to sit on the fence. They would say you're either with us or against us, and the sheep or the most people were like afraid to cause trouble, and this society was being meaner to them, so they were just going to lay low. But there's been enough momentum is starting to grow, and they're starting to kind of like
Well,
quietly
it's not
whisper to
momentum,
each other.
they ran out of money.
Hmm. Okay. What do you mean?
So money was what was allowing them to have that power, is because people with money in the institutions were saying, "I have the money. You do what they tell you to." Those that they're running at, they ran out of money. So all these layoffs, like the tsunami that's been happening,
Mm-hmm.
that's them running out of money, running out of steam, and so now they're losing actual power, not just metaphorical power.
Mm-hmm.
Like
So
you ever see like what happened to DEI was at a point in 2021 where they can make a phone call and you lost your job.
mhm.
That's gone now. Like that was really quick. Like we were very fortunate how quickly that happens. But because they ran out of money, they're running out of steam, and now they're cannibalizing each other.
Hmm. Like, I definitely agree. There is money. I'd have to think more about it as far as like if it's running out or why it's running out. But I guess one thing I'm thinking about is just that a lot of these things are just not. they're not that controlled. Like, and this is a funny thing because I'm usually the kind of the one that's going around to most people and saying, hey, there's so much of this is orchestrated. These things are intentional. People are trying to orchestrate this thing to get you to think this way for this reason. There's a ton of it out there, and for the normies, that's the argument I'm making to them. But a lot of times I have these conversations where we sometimes I'm like, I don't think it's that controlled. Like a lot of it is. Like a lot of the fires are started and a lot of the things are set into motion, and there's obviously plenty of media coverage and the educational institutions and the musicians, they decide who to publish record, like all there's so much control. But a lot of it just happens, like people like leftists that I used to know, they're just in their little circles, they're in their little DIY music scenes and their little crowds and their little Facebook circles, and they're just having these conversations, and a lot of them are just kind of transforming in the same way that they stumbled upon these ideas. A lot of them are starting to get out of these ideas, and that's happening kind of naturally and organically, I think. Right, a little bit of both.
Okay.
So I just wanted to say that. But I definitely do agree that, I mean, that's a good point. Like, there's been a lot of them shoveling money into the fire to keep this thing going, and maybe they can't do that anymore for different reasons. The other big thing I see as far as a factor that's transforming the left is obviously just, again, it is, I guess the way I would say it is that the hypocrisy of Israel is biting itself in the ass, and this was inevitable. If the Jews and all these other countries are pushing for this like pro-immigration, like pro mixed together, this kind of thing, and then it happened to them, and everyone started to go like, wait, that's not right. And what's funny is like people aren't aware of that. No, the left aren't like actively aware of that contradiction. They because they don't know that the Jews are they don't know that Israel and their connections and the Jews are the same ones pushing those things in our countries. So it's like this. It is this situation where we agree with the leftists as far as opposing Zion and Israel, but for different reasons. For us, it's because we realize like they're hypocrites, like they're parasiting all these other countries, and their hypocrisy is biting the ass. Whereas they're just basically like victim industrial complex. They're like, who's the victim in this situation? What's the hot new conflict? Oh, the Palestinians. They're the darker skinned ones, the poor ones that are getting genocided. So they're the victims. So I'm going to side with them. So that's happening, and that's obviously, it's getting crazy. Like you're literally having these riots in colleges across the country, and they're getting blamed for anti-Semitism. It's like, what the fuck is happening?
Yeah. Well, that doesn't help anything, by the way.
Well, I disagree, because I think it's an opportunity. Like I actually reconnected with a guy that we met in college, and we were on a similar place back then. We neither of us was very political. We were both just kind of like spiritual. I started to grow more right wing. He started to grow more left wing. We kind of got to the point of like we just kind of cut contact. But recently, he actually like had reached out, basically being like, I've seen you. I know you post about Jews all the time, and you post about Israel all the time. And so I'm curious what your thoughts are on this. And that's one of those things where we realized that we agreed, but we were on the same side, but for different reasons. And as another part of that same agreement. It's kind of like we're both socialist, but it's like national socialists or like Marxist socialists. Like it just depends on who you want your in group to be, basically.
Right.
So it was funny, but so I think it's an opportunity. I think this is an opportunity, and like I said too, because whenever we began this conversation today, we talked about some of the problems of the right. I know after a while it starts to annoy me, like the purity spiraling of a lot of the non-Christian right wing, and then obviously the Christian right wing frustrates me as well. And so I'm thinking, hey, if the left can get their heads out of this like overly victim, like trans craziness, like and get out from under the control of the elites, I might be able to work with it. I might prefer to work with them, or at least work more towards that side than I would
go for the women. The women lead that culture.
That's such a weird thing. Like it's so funny because like they do so inadvertently in a lot of ways. Like it's like the pretty.
Oh no, it's not. No, it's complicated. Actually, no, it's not complicated. The women lead that culture because the men only do it to get sex.
Right. They're the simps. And they follow them around.
Matriarchies are inherently orgiastic. You can see this in New York City, where women are single but they're getting laid every night, and usually with multiple people. It's quite disgusting, but that's just how they are. we need to start doing an Edward Bernays and strategizing for talking to women. But we can't do that without liberal women. Meaning, we need to get a liberal woman who speaks liberalese. I'm starting to sound like James Lindsay with my jargon nonsense here. Um, and then start to talk with them. And then they will start talking amongst themselves. Women are social, so we
Mhm.
can count on that pretty with certainty. And then they will start their own little movements. You'll see it pop up on Reddit. You'll see it pop up other places they talk. You'll see it in their little groups or whatever that
Mhm.
they do. Because most of them live on their phones anyway. So they'll get they'll start spreading, and then we just need to calm them down. If we can calm them down and get them to be less hyper consumptive, that would actually benefit a lot for creating a redirecting the left.
Mm.
Because the elite hold them because they hold the words. Women don't really do actions, they do words and emotions and thoughts. And so they then use men who are like the beta males, and they're like their little attack dogs, and they send them to do things, and then they follow.
Okay.
You
I agree.
tracking?
I agree. I definitely agree. Like that synopsis of kind of like how the left functions. Like as I'm processing that, I'm kind of fitting that into this model that I'm kind of throwing together. Um, okay, so the first thought I had was that like in a lot of ways you can view the left as like female incels. It's like the frustrated women, and you can view the right as the frustrated men, especially the far right. And so the way I think a lot of times is like we just need to instead of like trying to appeal to the male incels or the female incels, we just need to build our culture and our institutions around unions, around healthy marriages and healthy relationships, and then use the leverage that to help these incels stop being incels, like get them paired together, right? And so I thought about that, and I thought about how right now Christianity is kind of the best thing we have. That's like that in between. That's more of like family oriented, marriage oriented, community oriented. Obviously, there's a lot of problems there, and I guess I just kind of added in a little bit of an extra layer because I don't think it's just like right wing incels, left wing incels, and Christians in the middle. I don't think it's quite like that. I think it's more like right wing incels and left wing incels. You've got Christians that are kind of like a more like less incels, but still in
Christianity
the
is a
right,
spectrum.
huh?
Christianity is a spectrum. That's why you have e-whores online who have OnlyFans accounts and they wear hijabs or they talk about being Christians and citing Bible verses, and then they go and have sex with dildos in front of cameras.
Oh God, I'm not saying
A
that's
literal
stark of a,
spectrum.
I'm not saying that's stark of a contradiction, but I don't. I believe it exists. Like I'm sure it's out there. I guess what I'm going to illustrate is that so I think Christians are like less incels, but still kind of right leaning. I think there is like a camp that you could start to kind of articulate that is like a sort of like the Christian equivalent, more left leaning. Um, I don't know. In a lot of ways, that's still kind of Christian slash old school liberal slash something. It's somewhere in there, but I
Well,
don't.
it's complicated. That's why there's 300,000 denominations.
Right. So that's we'll just assume for now, for the sake of simplicity and productivity, I think that you could think about something like Christianity as being that bridge, as being this kind of like this religion, this cultural cohesive fabric that has some infrastructure. It's got some moral stuff baked in. It's got community and marriage and family, and it helps fight inceldom. That's good. That's really good conceptually, but obviously Christianity in practice, instantiated, it's got a lot of problems across the denominations.
Well,
Uh,
it caused the problems we have today because Christianity ultimately is the rejection of reality in favor of spirituality. This is when
yes.
pushed to its extreme. They say, I don't care about climate change. I
Mm.
don't care about forever war. I don't care about nuclear war. I don't care about any of
I
this
just care
noise
about
because
Jesus.
at the end of the day, in my book, Revelations is going to happen and
Yeah,
God's going to come and save us.
I
And
know. Yeah,
because everything in this book is true, therefore it will happen.
right.
And so everything else can just happen because I don't care. And so what that instills is it gives a green light for every single kind of evil to say, okay, they're just going to sit there because they're sitting in their church pews waiting for God to
I
come
don't
back.
care.
So I'm just going to do whatever I want,
Yeah,
right? And by the way, there's a lot of Christians, and
right.
so it's a problem.
Yeah.
The Christianity, I don't know how to do this, and I don't think that I'm aware of any mega churches that could probably push this. but they need to start pushing Christians back to the pre 1940s kind of Christians. The Revolutionary War probably was the best example, where the preachers were using the Bible and relating that to revolution against tyranny, because they were anti-Christian.
Mm.
The Christians in the U.S. were Protestants, and I believe the Crown at the time, um, if they weren't Catholic, they were a different kind of Christianity, and that was enough to get the people to rise up.
Mm-hmm.
And from the churches and the pastors were able to assist them with that. That's how they got the popular opinions. But today they're effectively sedated,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and we have to figure out how to switch that back on. And I
Yes.
don't know that we can until the boomers die, because the boomers are so content,
Mm-hmm.
and they have the society that we live in was made for them.
Yes.
That's why
It
the
is their
like when
dying
when you look at
dream.
the modern work, yeah, when you look at the modern workforce, everyone under 30 is getting cannibalized. They're losing their jobs like crazy
And they
because
can't
they're
afford houses.
redirecting money to pension funds. And I work in pensions. I see where the money goes.
Right.
They're redirecting it to pension funds.
Mm-hmm.
So they're cannibalizing the youth to hold up the old.
Oh God, it's gonna crumble. Um, so yeah, this is really good. Like this is a theme that we always come back to, and this is the purpose of the natural order. It's like basically, and like you said, transitional religion. We see that like this kind of, like I said, this like archetype of what a church or a religion is what is the building block of culture. That is the fabric of culture. That's an opportunity for us to make change. But obviously, what's in the operating system that's installed, the cultural operating system that is installed right now, has a lot of problems, and you identify them like being sedated, being detached from nature and reality, and they just don't care. Like that's huge. And I like what you said too about how, in a lot of ways we might, as part of trying to move forward, it's just probably gonna be a generational thing. We're just gonna have to let the older generations kind of die off. But tying back to what we talked about
Deadwood
earlier,
building up typically results in wildfires.
what results in wildfires? You said
Deadwood.
dead wood.
So when there's a bunch of wood that, when it
Right,
builds up,
right, right,
it catches fire much easier.
right.
I have two jokes, and then you can finish your point.
Sure.
I call boomers boomers because they blow up the economy on their way out, and they they are kind of acting like the forest in our way, and when they die, they're gonna act like deadwood, and in their wake, there's gonna be a massive wildfire
There's like a
that's
power,
going to
yeah,
burn
it's
everywhere.
like a power vacuum, and also too that they're sitting on so much of wealth because of their just like their capital, like their
I'm
houses.
not I'm not mad about it because I'm not someone who wants things. I was, I guess it was just kind of how I was raised. I don't really want things. A job is just a means to an end. I just live life day to day.
Interesting.
So I'm not one of those disenfranchised people because I could be a millionaire or I could be homeless. I don't really care. I'm just
All
chilling.
right.
So it's like, but I know for most Gen Zs, they want to own homes, they want to have
Mhm.
families, they want to do all these things, and I understand that is, I can see the anger and resentment, and
Right.
that's gonna be difficult for to control.
Yeah.
So we need a religion of some kinds to help bridge them through that process, and
Right.
I don't know that we're gonna have enough time to get that in place for them
Yeah.
when it needs to be there.
Right. Well, and this is the thing I'm thinking too, is because like of course we can't perfectly predict the future, but we can set up some chess moves. We can give ourselves some options, just like we talked about how Soros does. He sees opportunities, investments. He thinks steps ahead. He looks at cause and effect, and we could be prepared for. We could put a few of our eggs in a few different baskets and be in a better place. Like whether it's the total boog out, kind of thing. Like there's ways we can prepare for that. When it comes to like this transitional religion, we could go ahead and start putting eggs in that basket and go ahead and say, hey, here's some infrastructure we've built. Here you go. So and that is an area that I very much am interested in and have been working in. I will say as a side note, it's interesting to hear your personal philosophy, which is very much more like go with the flow, like less like desire or want or expectation oriented. That way you're not like disappointed, or kind of tethered by that. That's very interesting. But yeah, and so as far as running out of time, yeah, that may be the case. But regardless, I mean, we have some opportunity to go ahead and put some eggs in those baskets. Is what I'm getting at. And on that note, because again, it always comes back to should we try to help Christianity become a new denomination or something, or should we just try to just go ahead and somehow scrap it and work on the next new thing separately? And maybe it's a little bit of both, and I go back and forth. But typically, what I find is even among the most intelligent, aware Christians I know, if you're on that side of the threshold, if you're like, I'm Christian and I believe in the Bible, it just sucks you in. It's just a vortex into mental decay and death, unfortunately. And if you're like me and like you understand it, but you're just outside of it, you just take that one step and go, there's a lot of value here. I understand what's going on, but I'm not
Omnism
limited.
is the term for that.
Huh?
Omnism is what you're referring to as yourself. You're taking beliefs from different religions, keeping what works and removing what doesn't.
Sure. Yeah, I'm good with that. And but all that is to say, just if you take even one step out of it, and you're like, I'm not a Christian. Like I'm just not a textbook Christian. I don't just subscribe to the Bible. Like I compare that with a larger kind of. As soon as you take that one step, then it becomes. You just don't want to do it and you're just like, it's so bad, just throw it away. Like there's so many better things we could be doing. So and
Yeah,
so
you're a Christian in your life, but your theology is inherently non-Christian.
it just depends on how you define
It
it.
just
Like
depends on how you define
some
it.
people
Like
made it like say, oh, as long as you live in love, then you're Christian. But most people would say it's a hard. You have to accept Jesus, and I'm just like, I can try to stretch that a
you can
little
try
bit
to
and talk
stretch that a
about
little.
Christ
You can't even
consciousness or something.
define it, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah, exactly. But I guess the whole point I'm trying to make is that because it's such a polarizing thing, it's hard to find people who can work at that precipice and help to try to bridge that gap and transition. And so, I try so many times, but it's just like I just constantly am just like, I just got to work against it and just like create something new. And again, that new thing, like I was thinking about it the other day, that new thing very much you can slot Christianity into that. And that's again the idea of the natural order in the tree is that these branches can reconcile many different ideologies together. Like when you talk about Christianity, you're like, okay, you have the martyr archetype, you have the savior archetype, you have the victim archetype, you have grace and love and
Well, that's
salvation.
Protestantism. Orthodoxy is a little bit different. Orthodoxy, they all believe that they are in the actual body of Christ,
Hmm.
and then they maintain rituals as a form of sacraments to keep them in that state of mind.
Right. So the analogy I always come back to is this idea of a tree, and you'll have this tree, and the base of the tree, the thing that you need to make sure that everybody is on board with in your society, is reality, is science, is evolution, is objective reality. This is the thing that, as long as you're not contradicting that natural law, then you're good. And if you are, then you are bad, and you need to be, you're bad. So that's fine. So as long as and this has always been my biggest contention with the Christians. I'm like, you are not a branch on this tree. You have severed yourself from this tree of truth. And in my terms, or sorry, in their terms, I'm saying this is God. This tree, this is reality, is truth, is logos, is God,
Well,
and you have.
Christians used to believe that. That's in the 1300s. That was Christianity.
Mhm. Yeah,
Like
it was
Thomas
probably.
Aquinas created the actual doctrinal theology. That's why science and evolution,
Yeah.
all of the original scientists were Christians.
Yeah, I will say that it really wasn't until I think it, and this is something I've talked with Kurt about. It really
It
was
was a
not.
reaction to Darwin, by the way.
That's
It
what I'm, that's what
happened
I'm
after Darwin.
That's what I'm saying. That's exactly what I was about to say. It wasn't really until Darwin that there was like a hard kind of like you couldn't really reconcile it. Before then, even in the founding fathers, like a lot of them were deists because they could say, yeah, like I'm Christian. It's just I kind of believe it's part of the clockwork of the universe and
Yeah,
it fits
I
in.
would say most people, including myself, who are Christians, likely have the same theology as the founding fathers, as they were Christians.
Right.
Whereas modern Christians, they cannot reconcile Darwin. And so
Yeah.
their reaction to Darwin was we're going to manufacture almost like a
Yeah. It
cult
just
of
it just went
personality.
off the rails at that point. It was like
Yeah,
we
no,
can't
it really
reconcile
did.
with reality at all at that
When I
point.
go to like my dad is, I guess you can call him an associate pastor. There's not exactly a hierarchy now, part
Sure.
time. I listen to their sermons and I'm like, this isn't Christianity.
Hmm.
This is a cult of personality
Mm.
revolving around Jesus.
Mm.
That's all this is. It's not actual Christianity.
Right.
The real Christians died off in the 1800s.
Right.
And
Well,
every time you bring this up, they get mad because they're like, "No, I am a Christian. I'm this. I'm that." And I'm like, "Okay, where are your monasteries?
mhm.
They don't have any.
Well, they
Only
would
the
be like it.
Orthodox
They would
do."
like it's my church. Like it's my church community.
It's not. They don't make sacrifices. They don't do any of that. It's just accommodation and ease of. That's why Christianity is dying. Is because the Protestants, they got so big, and then they were hollow, and
Hmm.
so the young men are like, "Screw you guys. You don't provide me anything,"
Right.
and so they leave.
Right. It's a
And all they're
liability.
left with is a bunch of broken, like neurotic 40-year-old women.
Yeah. Yeah. And these people who have defected have not quite built something else yet. I mean, yeah, the whole leftist
Oh yeah, not
craziness.
to mention the wake of destruction they left after 1950 with the young population. How many women you meet covered in piercing and tattoos? Oh, I grew up in a Baptist household. Of course you did. You were freaking traumatized
Yeah. Yeah. And
because it's a cult,
I'm
a
one of it.
religion.
Like I grew up in a Baptist Christian household, and I have piercings and tattoos. So like I am one of those.
Yeah,
Like so a lot of that is fueled by that that sense of rebellion. It's like I just want to make it clear that I am not part of that. Right.
yeah. You know where that doesn't exist? Catholic and Orthodox Christian households. That doesn't occur
Hmm.
because it's not a cult. It's a religion.
Mm.
Protestantism is more cult like than anything else.
Right.
And every time I point this out, they get extremely aggressive and they start citing Bible verses.
Yeah.
And if you really want to piss off a Christian, you tell them this: even the devil can quote scripture to suit his own purposes, and then you can refer them to Matthew, and it will trigger them to no end because they cannot reconcile it. There's
Yeah.
two there's
Hmm.
two things in the Bible that Protestants cannot reconcile: the Book of Job, number one,
Hmm.
and then the devil using the Bible to tempt Jesus. Those are the two things.
Damn.
They cannot reconcile those, even though they use them for their own sermons. Those
Yeah.
completely go against the Protestant theology.
I like that. I've often said that like you could pretty much make an argument for anything and support it with the Bible, and then you could argue the opposite of that and support it with the Bible. Like so, it's almost like arbitrary at some point. Um, what was I gonna say? Oh, I kind of like this idea of because a lot of the Christians I talk to, obviously a lot of them are like more Protestant, but they're always saying like, well, that's not real Christianity. That's not real Christianity. We need to get back to real Christianity, the pure, true. And so I'm
Not
like,
real communism. You just have to retry communism. We're like that
yeah,
before.
pretty. I mean, I agree. But I'm just thinking. So I'm just thinking as a different approach. Like if they're saying they want to get back to the roots in the beginning, then that's where there may be more of a case to try to use or actually use like Orthodox or Catholicism as like a like here you go. This is closer to the original if that's what you're looking for. And like you said, a lot of times those are and like Stephen argues as well that like those denominations are more aligned with natural law because they never really I guess I don't know like I feel
Yeah,
I
when you
don't
go to an Orthodox or Catholic service, it's just rituals, and it's mindfulness.
all
It's
right.
mindfulness and like a fourth century style kind of thing. They don't
Mhm.
even do sermons.
Yeah.
Like they really don't. That's I think it's more of a community than anything else.
Yeah. I think it comes down for me to evolution. Like if you can find a denomination or a Christian who can reconcile evolution, then I'm like, okay, that's cool. Like if that works, it tracks. Like that's fine. I just don't.
The issue is if it follows evolution, it should succeed, but they're not succeeding. So where's the disconnect?
What do you mean?
Natural selection should be at play if a religion follows evolutionary theory, not theologically speaking, but technically speaking, right?
I see what you mean.
But it's not.
It's like a meta thing. It's like even if they don't believe in
So where I would
evolution,
say where's the disconnect? I think is where we need to find. We need to find that.
it's this is hilarious because it's like the reason. Okay, so even if Christians do not believe in evolution, they like everybody are still subjected to the mechanisms of evolution, whereby they must adapt to survive. And like you said,
And
Christianity
God
is,
Himself abides by natural order. That's correct.
huh?
I said you are correct. Even God Himself must comply with natural order,
Right.
either because he has to or because he chooses to.
Or yeah, I mean, you could say that God is natural order, or God is the originator of natural order. That's fine. But all I'm trying to say, the funny thing is that I think that because you just said, what is the factor that is making them decline and not survive? Like, how are they not adapting? How do they need to adapt? And they need to adapt by acknowledging or understanding the methods of adaptation. They're not evolving because they're not accepting evolution. It's kind of really funny to think about it that way. Um,
But
yeah.
evolution's just changed, though. I think that's been demonized a lot by the Christians. Evolution happens every day. I'm evolving.
Mhm. Okay,
We're all
so
like, by the way, humans are objectively, not subjectively, objectively more attractive, and they're getting more attractive every single decade.
on average, you would
That
say,
like I'm just saying that's evolution. Now
hmm,
we also have dysgenics,
right?
but I can pull up pictures from the 1800s because we have those, and then the 1920s, and then the 1950s. We are getting very ugly, dysgenic, obese women, but we're also getting very attractive, and they're more attractive than they ever have been. We are evolving as a species towards a specific way. Our phenotypes are changing, right? So we can't. It's ridiculous to say that evolution doesn't exist. I think what they're referring to is the Darwinic process of microscopic evolution, and I really think that Christians need to stop attacking evolution because it's literally happened within the lifespan of Christianity.
Right. I'm trying to think. Okay, so yeah, because it is a bit of a semantic challenge. Because, like you said, evolution could be defined
Semantics
at
are terribly important with Christians. Everything is semantics with them.
right. Yeah, I agree, and with in general, um, like you said, evolution could be defined as just change, and so it's like, well, okay, everything's changing, but that's a little bit too general of a definition as far as what I'm getting at. And then if you tried to say like Darwinism, which would be thought of as like specifically within a biological context, even that is a little bit too specific. So it's almost like I don't know that I would want to use a different word, but I'd almost just want to kind of like find a nice middle ground or basically clarify my own definition somewhere in the middle. Let me see how Darwinism is actually defined because we might be able to use Darwinism. I've used it before. If it's not that specific. So the theory of evolution, yeah. So Darwinism says the evolution of species because obviously, like when I say evolution, I'm not just talking about change. I am talking about mutation, adaptation via mutation and selection. Mutation and selection. Like that is what I now mutation and selection does not just apply to organisms. Like it applies to ideas. It applies to
Christians will be okay with selection. They will not be okay with mutation, even though nothing about mutation deviates from scripture.
well, I would say that they're okay with. I've had conversations with the Christians where I'll be like, okay, like like we'll give an example of selection. We'll say, okay, you have 10 members, 10 animals of this species, and five of them have a little bit more of a camouflage coat color, and so those are more likely to survive. And they'll be like, yeah, I'm good with that. That makes sense. And then you'll be like, okay, so you agree with selection, you understand selection. So now let's talk about mutation. Like we have DNA. DNA is what makes us who we are. Uh, DNA can change either by radiation from the sun or by errors during copying. And so if you have a change in the DNA, that means you can have an extra finger or all kinds of different, or just, longer hair or a certain color hair or just.
The biggest, I see where you're going with this. So the
Right.
biggest issue the Christians have, and I can see this when you see debates, when you see, what's that crazy drunk guy? He's not actually drunk in the videos. The creationist, he actually was like just arrested a week ago or a month ago for being
Mm,
drunk and beating his wife or something. Um,
God.
It's like it's not the, was it the guy who found the ark or something? I don't remember.
I'm
There's
not
so
sure.
many of these con artists. Anyway, when you listen to their rebuttals, they go and they bring up evolutionary textbooks. And they
Sure.
say, so you're telling me that this amoeba here, we come from this amoeba,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And then they respond, yes. What they're doing is they're taking a fixed um product of evolution, right?
Sure.
And they're saying this exact thing you are saying it came from. That's not true. the things we came from are long extinct.
Sure.
We did not evolve from chimpanzees. We evolved
Common
from
ancestor.
ape-like creatures.
Yes, yes.
When Christians argue, they say, so you're saying that we came from monkeys, chimpanzees. We didn't come from chimpanzees.
Right.
Chimpanzees are their own line.
But yes,
We
we
come
came
from
from
a different
apes.
line of long extinct, and because that's since been removed.
Right.
Where I have never ever seen a evolutionary argument framed just as I just told you.
I don't know.
Because it completely removes the semantic aspect.
Mm.
I'm not saying we came from an amoeba. I'm saying we came together. Oh, by the way, when you talk to them about it, I tend to find it easier to say that God was the divine spark
Sure.
that set the world into the spiral,
Sure.
right? And when you have a Yahtzee jar, you shake it around enough times, sometimes you're going to get words, right?
Yep.
So enough stuff runs into each other, you're going to get random
Exactly.
crap.
Exactly.
And sometimes that random crap just spirals further. So like that, it makes sense that you get life. The two things that you can give them wins on is DNA does not fit into any evolutionary sequence because DNA has too much mutation within it for it to make any sense. Meaning we cannot replicate that. You can't. It doesn't fit in any evolutionary sequence. It's just there. So that's odd, right? And it exists in single cell organisms as well as us. And so it doesn't fit into any sequence no matter where you start. So the jump from nothing to single cell, DNA should not exist. And then the second is the jump from unconscious to conscious beings. Everything else actually makes sense. Because it makes sense how you can go from a fish to an amphibian to a reptile to a bird. Because when I dissect a bird, it's very similar to us, like a lizard.
So you're
Now,
clearly
pressure doesn't make sense. But we also weren't alive billions of years ago. And it's also a good argument. The Earth is always moving around and shifting waters and everything. So it's really hard for us to argue, oh, the Earth is billions of years old. Unless we're going and diving like 30,000 miles or whatever under the Earth and dragging up a rock that was on the surface a billion years ago, which we're not going to do that. I don't even know how to do that. No human can survive that dive. So we can't prove it. But the theory makes sense in theory.
okay. So, first of all, I love that we've made our way back to this conversation, and I love that our conversations have basically lead back to these places because these let us know that these are core places, and like we're already saying, like evolution is such a core point. You are obviously like farther in your understanding than most people, but yet we've had some very interesting contentions about particular places, and we'll get to that. But before we get that deep, I think what I would like to do is talk about where is that threshold that most people get hung up on. As far as where they're like, no, 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 I don't believe that. Because you mentioned a second ago, like that clarification that we share an ancestor with chimpanzees, not that we came from chimpanzees. That's important, but I don't think that ends up being a deal breaker for most people because most people they still don't accept that we shared an ancestor with chimpanzees. They don't believe most people that I've come across, especially Christians, they can't accept or they do not believe or they do not understand that any creature evolved from another one. They would never say that lions share an ancestor with this or that anybody shares an ancestor with anybody.
They can't believe that because that deviates from the ark story.
Exactly.
So the ark is only big enough to hold all of the animals in the Middle East. And actually, you can look at the size and you can Google what animals existed 6,000. Actually, we have to adjust timelines.
That's an interesting study.
Wow, that's a super so we have to push it back to. It would have been after dinosaurs, but before humans. So let's say 30 million years ago.
Sure.
And then push it up to like maybe 5, because we would have to have modern humans being exposed to it. So let's say 5 million years ago. All of the animals in the Middle East probably could have fit on that ark. Now there's none because it's a giant desert, but back then there was enough to fill that ark. Sure. And then that story was transferred down because we know there was an event called the Younger Dryas Excursion.
Right.
It struck a bunch of meteors, struck Canada, it struck this is I've never seen scientists debate this. It's what ended the Ice Age, right?
Right.
That flood is probably where that myth came from.
Right.
And there was probably people alive back then who probably saw that coming, and they
Mhm.
probably were farmers or something. They threw a bunch of animals on there, and the entire world wouldn't have flooded. There would have been dry spots. Like when you dump a cup of water on asphalt, there's dry spots, right? It flows in weird ways. So it doesn't always cover everything. So animals would have survived. So that myth makes sense. But for them, all the animals across the entire world had to fit on that boat. For that to be true, evolution cannot exist.
Right. So, well, even more fundamental. I mean, you're hitting at the core point, and the reason why most people get stuck on it, which is that it contradicts Scripture. And even simpler than the ark story at the beginning, just the creation, just the fact that God created everything at once. He didn't create amobas and have everything evolve from them.
It doesn't specify that evolution can coexist with the Genesis story. It cannot coexist with the flood myth.
That's interesting. That's an interesting take because I've always, for me, I've always seen it get hung up on, especially because like it literally says like on the third day he created all the animals, right, or something like that, right?
Yeah,
So,
but then they could interbreed and create different species, and I think they acknowledge that. So
mm,
no, you're right. I'm
that's
getting
tough.
stuck on semantics
Well,
there.
and see,
You know,
I've
you're
heard
correct. You're correct.
people try to stretch it, and they'll say, well, the day that they're talking, like day three, actually could have represented 3 million, like millions of years, and
Yeah. So remember in the Bible, which book? I should know this. I was just reading it a couple days ago. It's a year is a 1 day is 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is 1 day to God, or something like that. Like
yeah,
that's commonly known.
right. So yeah, there's a lot of interpretations like that where they really try to make it work, and this is what I'm saying, like Godspeed on these Christian theorists who are trying to make the scripture work. But to me, the conclusion is that we need to say, okay, look, the Bible is not literal. The Bible is just meant to be a guide. It's meant to be it was just what we had at the time.
Unfortunately for us, the only person more inefficient at communicating than a 2-year-old is God. So
Yes. That is true. But yeah, it's like, and here's going back to something we said earlier. You talked about using this things that Christians can't reconcile and things that you can do to like really break their mental and piss them off and stuff, and like referencing particular scripture and so forth. One thing that I've found the way to do is like, okay, so you're saying I should go read the Bible. The Bible is a source of truth. The characters and the people who wrote the Bible, who are in the Bible, they're important because they communed with God or they listened to God or whatever. Okay, so if I'm trying to be a Christian and I'm trying to have the best relationship with God and Jesus that I can, wouldn't it make sense for me to wouldn't it make sense for me to prioritize my own communion and my own, like, if God speaks to me through dreams, through signs, through all the ways that can be done, would I not trust that more than the Bible itself? And if there was a contradiction there, if God was strongly telling, and this is, I use their language when I speak to them, and this is what I say. I say, I truly believe that God has shown me in many ways through creation, through all of objectivity and nature and truth, that we should not take the Bible literally. Like that was not his or the universe's intention. And so I think I should trust that voice more than reading about someone else's voice. And that's something I use, and I think there's a lot of power to that. You see people like, what was the Mormon dude? He was basically just like, yeah, God told me this thing, he revealed this, and people are like, okay. And if you speak with enough confidence and conviction, which is not false, is not a lie. Like I truly, that is the cornerstone of my faith, is that conviction. I think that there's a lot of power to that.
the Bible in the fourth, well, let's say 10th century, because in the fourth century it's up for debate if it was even completed by the Council of Nicaea yet.
Right.
It answered all of the questions that needed to be answered at that time period.
Right.
Remember, the Bible's purpose is to relay a theology,
Yep.
a way
A,
to
a
view the
worldview.
world,
A worldview. Yeah.
and
A
then a
simple worldview.
purpose, right?
Yes.
So, and the way that they have done that is they give you a series of stories. And by the way, the Council of Nicaea, this is like 130 IQ scholars who do nothing but learn all day, and there's thousands of them. And they had all these scrolls. Back then, they easily could have answered every single question that needed to be answered because science didn't exist back then. So it was much easier. They could answer all the questions for life that were needed. After the scientific revolution, it's complicated because I have to take these verses intended to answer 10th century problems, and they have to answer my 21st century problems. How
Right.
does the Bible reconcile me? How am I supposed to view a cloned human or AI? How
Yeah.
am I supposed to view a transgender? This is as society becomes more complex, religion has to adapt.
Agree.
This is why the Jews have a one up on everyone.
Agree.
They have said since day one, our religion is up for interpretation. Whatever the Talmud says, when you read the Talmud, it means whatever the rabbi says it means,
Hmm.
right? That's clearly relayed across most Jewish theology. So they can adapt with the times. Christianity is stuck in the 10th century,
Hmm.
and it's hitting them hard.
Yeah.
They
Yep.
cannot reconcile, and as society moves on, fortunately for them, IQ is dropping. That's heavily weighted in their favor because the lower your IQ, the less you have the capacity to understand the world. So when you have a man on a pulpit telling you how the world works, and these stories are starting to reflect your life and your problems, you're going to follow that.
Yes.
Typically, that's going to be the single mother or the woman who just is having a hell of a time. My girlfriend is currently going through job troubles. She's stressed, all this stuff.
Right.
Christianity suits her. I'm not going to call it sedation, but mentally it calms her,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That's what she needs, and
Yeah.
so that's fine. It's good for women, but men, you're not attracting any of them unless they're like 40 and like butt fuck ugly. Like you're not gonna
Mm.
talk with them.
Yeah.
So they
That's
need
interesting.
they need they need to reconcile this. There needs to be a revolution in the Protestant church. The
Yes.
Orthodox is fine because they are having children at a rate where enough of them are staying at the church, and so
Yeah.
they can continue it on. Protestantism is not so fortunate.
I like that. I mean that a revolution in the Protestant church. Like I mean that I definitely agree. Like that's pretty much what I feel like is the purpose. Like my purpose or an opportunity, especially being in the South and being like Protestant is what's here. And like what you said, like you know, Christianity it serves a purpose. It gives people a purpose and it gives them a worldview. It gives them a set of an infrastructure. And we still need it. We still need that. We still need something simple and packaged for most people. But we've got to make sure that it's not contradicting nature. That's it. Like we just got to reconcile like something. And this is why I say there might be an opportunity. You could still, I think, regardless, there will be something like this. I've said this time and time again. I don't know how much I'm going to be the
I
one who
don't
works
fully
on.
like. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. Just tell them to read Summa Theologica. It was written in like 1400.
These people
Like
can't
just
read.
read it. Thomas Aquinas answers all of the questions.
Right.
And he uses natural law. He invented it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is not a complicated thing. They just need to get their head out of the sand. They're so stubborn because Protestants, specifically Bible Belt, where me and you are raised, they are so militant on anything that sounds like it might contradict their beliefs.
Right.
When I was a kid, I was not allowed to watch Harry Potter because my mom said that she heard that there was a Bible verse that it's anti witchcraft. Because they are wizards, that's witchcraft. Therefore, that's the devil.
She
It
heard.
it
Yeah.
sounded like it might contradict. She didn't even know,
Yeah.
so
That's
I
my
wasn't allowed to
parents.
watch it.
My
I,
parents too. Yeah.
like so because they don't think.
Right. It's
That's
all
what I'm saying.
emotional
The biggest.
processing. Yeah.
I know I have never met a
Social processing.
Protestant outside of their core famous leadership with an IQ above like 105
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
because they can't because if you have a high enough IQ, you can ask these questions and poke holes, and
And
you're like,
process
oh,
it.
well, this doesn't make sense.
So, but which is okay. We understand that like the very nature of IQ means that 100 is the average. So a lot of the population is going to be at or below that, and they've got to have some kind of system to work with. And so it's up to
Listen, I would rather that because then they're going to resort to hedonism or the Soviet Union nonsense.
agree.
So Christianity is a preferable alternative to any of that. That said, we like there has to be. I don't know how to communicate with them because I know what words not to use because
Mm-hmm.
they have trigger words. This is something that I learned working with mental health people.
Hmm.
Everyone has like little trigger words, so you have to avoid that while relaying it. Noah Ravoy said like all the time he'll say things, and then he'll say it doesn't contradict the Bible, and then he claims the women calm down. I'm not so sure. They might not. They might calm down in the moment, but then they'll start um, conspiring in their head. Like, well, wait a second, what about this? Why or that? And that's going to. It's not a permanent solution. Like, we need to figure. There needs to be some kind of compromise here, or like maybe the Baptist convention. The Southern Baptist Convention is probably one of the biggest ones. If you can get some leadership in there to pass regular like laws, because they have their own law system, um, that might actually work. But I don't actually know who their leadership is.
Okay, I think I think, and this is just I think the two techniques that, and I've thought a lot about these kind of things, and it's just coming back to me. The two best techniques I think for approaching Christians in this kind of effort. One is just fitting what they already know into a bigger picture. Fitting what they already know into a bigger picture. So say, hey, Jesus, the Bible, God, everything you know, the flood, this is all beautiful and powerful and real. But there's other there's other prophets, there's other saviors, there's other saints, there's other gods. You know, like can you that you know, I feel like maybe there's some kind of pivot there. Or you know, what you could say too is like, yes, there is one supreme being at the top, but you know, let's just work on that a little bit. Like it's, you know, this Bible was just one description of that being. There are other encounters from all over the world. Maybe there's an angle there.
We need so it needs it doesn't need to be rewritten. It needs to be reframed.
Agree. Absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. Like, yeah, the Bible is great. We're not going to toss it out. We're not going to redo it. We're just going to say, hey, this is just one piece of a bigger puzzle. And for a lot of them, their IQ may be like, oh, I can't handle that.
In 1950, I don't see a reason why we can't reframe it again.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
that could work.
And then the biggest thing, the other biggest recipe key is just, again, is that conviction. Is saying that, like, you know, like, because they'll be like, well, the Bible tells us to do this. God's voice is speaking to me and us so strongly that we know that this is the way. Like, you know, we know that he's telling us that don't limit yourself to the Bible. Yes, the Bible is inspired, divinely inspired, and gives us a lot of guidance, but we must take that as a piece of this bigger revelation. And we could write our,
Or at the minimum, use the Bible as a way to frame everything you read, so you don't deviate it. Because a lot of times, and my mother's like this.
yeah,
If you tell her to read something, if it deviates from the Bible enough, she won't read it. And
right,
so if you can tell them everything you read can be framed through the divinely inspired Bible, they might be more okay with
yeah.
that. Baby steps.
Yeah,
So
yeah, I agree, and we would have that would be like a line to tread and understand where do you really lose them, but it would be difficult because like look, for example, we say interpret evolution through biblical understanding. Well, that's nearly impossible. Like it's just like there's just a stark contradiction. So that's just at some point that branch is going to have to snap. Uh, but you know, it doesn't have to be a hard kind of thing. There is some opportunity
not
to
all Christians follow the Bible, though.
exactly.
Completely,
They
and they
follow
pick
their
and choose.
intuition. They follow their preacher.
Yeah,
They follow their community. They follow their heart and their intuition and what they
actually,
know.
I'm 100% sure that there are sects of Christian Protestantism. Again, I have to always clarify Protestantism, that they actually do follow evolution. The Baptists don't, and there's a lot of them. But I would assume that others do. My fiance's church, the Coptic Orthodox Church, a lot of them are scientists. They're evolutionists, but they still believe in God. I'm
Interesting.
not entirely certain how they reconcile that.
See if you can
Um,
reach out to him because I may do some research as well because I've not really talked to anybody who could really make the connection. You know, a lot of them just go like a lot of them are
yeah,
just
her
like
priest actually asked to talk with me because I have to get baptized in her Coptic faith in order to marry her.
right,
But he was an engineer.
right,
So I actually I have some theological questions,
yeah,
more so because I want to understand their logic. I do
or
know
lack
that the
thereof.
Orthodox, yeah, the Orthodox, I know a lot of the stuff they believe is metaphorical. I do know that.
Right,
Um, and then they follow natural law. They follow hierarchy, and then they reject. Um, you know how like there's the seven deadly sins. Well, there's also like the seven pleasures. I think.
interesting.
It's like glory, draw. I don't like what is it? It's like it's positive things. What we would
Sure,
call positive. It's
sure.
like the pursuit of marriage and things like that. They
The
reject
seven
those
heavenly
because
virtues.
whatever it is, like because what they reject those because those get in the way of pursuing the divine. They're monks. I'm clarifying that they're monks do this. Um, that video I sent you, uh, if you fast forward, he lists them out. Um, but yeah, that I'm curious how they reconcile such things. According to my fiance, she says that they have other books, but those are not divinely inspired. Those just dictate their um the way they process certain things.
Right.
Kind of like the Jews, they have the Talmud, which refines the first five books.
Yeah.
Sorry, the Talmud, right? Isn't are they separate? There's a
The
Talmud and then there's
Torah,
their
the Torah and the
the Torah.
Talmud.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it. Yeah. So they that refines that. The Orthodox is the same way. Their monks are the ones who write the interpretations, and then the interpretations are encoded into ritual.
Yeah. um talking about people reconciling, I think of two examples of people I know. One, like Steven, you've heard on Facebook, Orthodox. Like, he still struggles with, he says they, and I even pointed this out, he says they reconcile natural law, but I'm like, but you don't seem to grasp evolution, and you seem to have a problem with it. And that's it. And then Carl, a guy I worked with, he we had a lot of good conversation, very intelligent. But whenever we got down to the root of it, and I was like, "How do you reconcile that?" He was like, "I just trust that God will show it to me one day, like after I die or whatever." I'm just like, "Okay." So basically, you don't try to logically right. And I was like, "Okay, whatever." Um, but
I can't be mad at the Christians for waiting on like divine inspiration though, because the spirit worlds. I after looking at the Monroe Institute, their studies and
mm-hmm,
the 100 people saying the exact same thing. They
mm-hmm,
were funded by the CIA, so maybe some shadiness going on.
right,
But the spirit world does seem to exist. And it does seem that there's different locations that you can visit. It's not a far stretch to say that the Christians
yeah,
are actually correct, that there is an actual very powerful spirit
yeah,
that transcends realms. I posted a video about black holes on
mm-hmm,
Facebook.
yeah,
They were saying that once you go through a black hole is the way like the physics work is the other is it even though you're getting sucked in somewhere, it's not a different dimension, but there's white holes. A white hole is the reverse
mm-hmm,
that coincides on the other side that you come out of. And then you can actually interact depending on where you enter with you can see and interact with our worlds,
mm-hmm.
but they cannot interact with you.
Interesting, like a one-way
Kind of
street.
like you ever seen Interstellar?
Mm-hmm, yeah,
It's a lot like that. Um, and it's actually interesting that the findings that I was watching. I don't know how old this finding is. I would have. It's way past Einstein, um, because his theory needed some refining.
yeah,
But it was an interesting concept saying, I wonder if like the spirit world exists. I don't like the word dimension, but it's almost like it's a different atom structure that
sure,
can come in between ours without actually interacting with us, if that makes sense.
right,
And so if you're contacting from like a spiritual point, then that's not a far stretch to say that the beings there could easily interact with us
yeah.
from a consciousness level.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Like, that's very much within the realm of possibility and things that I believe. Like, especially with like the whole psychedelic realm and the experiences people have had. Like, there's definitely more to it. There's science and what we have been able to objectively measure and the patterns we know of constitutes a good bit of our reality. But there's obviously still much we're
Well, yeah,
learning.
we've mastered the material world, but there is an astral world
Yeah,
that we need science to reach. That is, we're having a really hard time figuring that out. So I
right.
think that's going to be the next big jump. Once we figure that out, I think physics will be able to accelerate like crazy.
Yeah. Well, that's what's gonna be wild though, because like you're still gonna have people like psychologically dragging way behind because they can't even. They're still catching up and trying to understand evolution, and let alone
Well,
like
it would, I think there would be a lot of suicides. I would imagine Christians in bulk, specifically Protestants, they wouldn't be able to psychologically handle it. And so they would say it's the devil or something like
right,
that. And then they would just get left behind so far they fall into despotism.
right. I think these would be
It'd be
good.
like a Game of Thrones religion. where everyone's like poor and doing weird shit.
These would be some good things to pick up on next time. Like just talking about like what what actually is possible, like spiritually and stuff. Of course, keeping the core point in mind that we can theorize and there's all kinds of realm for possibility, but as long as we're not contradicting what we do know in the theories, in the science and the objective we do have, right? And then, like you said too, like they're gonna struggle more and more to think about like technology and AI and from a biblical standpoint.
Well, yeah, I mentioned that. Remember, the Bible is only meant to answer 10th century questions, so
Exactly, and
they
that's
will
our
have a
challenge.
harder time as time goes on.
Yeah, and so that is our challenge. People like us who are able to be aware and able to potentially lead and innovate and help adapt is how we're going to help with that. You mentioned we talked about the potential to, like you mentioned in one of the denominations, they have other books that kind of supplement their Bible. And as a software
Yeah,
engineer,
and
like that's
if
kind
we
of
don't
how,
help them, they'll likely end up like Buddhism, where they become a minority religion.
and just kind of fade out. Yeah. But yeah, so and it'll be interesting to see what all happens. But like, yeah, I think about. I was gonna say I think about it like software, like as far as what we can kind of do, or we can kind of install a few extra like features, and not necessarily rip out the whole operating system and throw in something new. It's not gonna work like that for people. It's got to be like add some features, add some support, add some enhancements, and then over time, enough small changes over time looks like a whole new thing. Um, so yeah, I think that's the kind of unifying theme of like what we are kind of developing, and the point we end up coming back to a lot as far as how I know me personally, that's where I'm investing so much of my energy is like how can we operate in this cultural space and give us a better kind of cultural operating system and path forward. Um, so yeah, I appreciate you jumping on to continue developing that.
Yeah, man.
Cool. You have anything else for today? I think that's probably a decent stopping point for now.
No, yeah, you're good. I can. I'm assuming you're tired and have things to do, so you're good to
Um,
stop.
I'd usually make it around an hour or so. So yeah, I'll go ahead and close it out for there. Let's see here. Go and stop that recording. Thanks everybody.